Introducing Punchbowl News. From Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, and John Bresnahan. News about the people who matter, for the people who matter. Join the community at punchbowl.news.
All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm Anna Palmer, the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Thank you so much for joining us in person as well as on the live stream this morning for a pop-up conversation with Connecticut Democrat Rosa DeLauro about access to women's health care. A big thank you to Bear for making this conversation possible. DeLauro, who also serves as the top Democrat on the powerful Appropriations Committee, is joining us for this conversation where we're going to talk about news of the day, what's happening in the states, as well as just overall funding for women's access to health care. Afterwards, I'm going to be joined by Yasmin Wadan, VP of U.S. Medical Affairs and Women's Health at Bayer, as well as Beth Battolino, CEO of Healthy Women. A quick reminder that you can find all things Punchbowl News at punchbowl.news. You can sign up for our free morning newsletter, find out more about other events that we have going on in the coming days and weeks. And as always, you can find us on all social media platforms at Punchbowl News. With that, let's welcome the Congresswoman to the stage. Thank you so much. All right, good morning. Oh, very well, thank you. No shortage of things to talk about, as always.
Amen. Amen.
Here in Washington. We're going to start, as we always do in these conversations, with a few news of the day topics, and then we're going to get right into women's access to health care. But first of all, the big news of the day, TikTok CEO is on Capitol Hill talking about probably defending the business practices of the social platform. There's actually several hearings on China this morning. Love to get your take on TikTok in general. Do you agree with some of your colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, that the social platform should be banned?
Well, first of all, thank you very, very much for this opportunity. It's great to be with you and a wonderful audience at this hour of the morning, and to be at Hawk and Dove. I've not come to Hawk and Dove in the past.
Not in the morning, anyway.
Well, no, but even at that, but for an event of this kind, a debate, a conversation, etc. It's more different level of activity coming to Hawk and Dove. And I also want to do a shout out to Bayer, once housed in Connecticut. But thank you for the great work and your work on women's health. First of all, I think with regard to your question, Anna, that I think it's the absolute appropriate role for the Congress to be investigating. I think that's what we need to do. I think particularly in the case of TikTok, because it's partially owned or controlled by a foreign adversary, and we need to be conscious of that. But I also think that what we need to do is, because the massive amount of data that is being collected, that's also being collected by platforms in the U.S. So the entire area of the accumulation of the data and privacy issues that arise from that are really topics that the Congress ought to be taking up. So I applaud, what they're doing, and let's just see, what the details are, and let's continue to have a thoughtful discussion about what is in the best interest of the American people in this regard.
But not yet kind of jumping on the bandwagon for it's time to ban it in the U.S.
No, I think that we have to think about national security, but I want to just see the fulsome debate on that before there's a knee-jerk response one way or the other in trying to move forward.
You are the top Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee, and earlier this week we reported on the Biden administration getting back to you about all types of cuts and programs that would be impacted if Republicans were successful in their efforts to cut spending levels down to fiscal year 2022 levels. You've spoken about how Republicans' efforts could hurt children, could hurt seniors, veterans, low-income Americans. Can you describe what you see as the impact of that plan?
Well, I think it really is devastating, and I'll tell you why. When the comments come out, and we all know that this promise that the Speaker made to a portion of the Republican conference in order to be able to be Speaker of the House, it was a trade for votes, that this effort of applying the budget numbers from 2022 to a 2024 a budget agreement. And I started to think about that and what would that mean? And overall, if you look at it, and I want to talk about the human consequences, but just because this is an audience that deals in Washington, D.C., and is people who work in a number of the offices and institutions here, that you're looking at overall for 2024, that would be about an 8% cut. If, as some say, that we would then hold defense harmless, that then we would look at about an 18 to 19% cut in services. And then if you say that, well, you don't want to hurt veterans, because what would happen with veterans and veterans health care, it is about a $32 billion cut to veterans health care. So if you say that, well, my gosh, we can't do that, we have to hold them harmless, then we're looking at almost a 25% cut in domestic spending, which has it is just an unbelievable impact on the services that we provide. It's hundreds of thousands of people who will lose their homes. It is the loss of child care, which means that people will not be able to go to work. It is about putting out of reach education and job training for people. It is, in fact, going to take cops off the street. That is defunding the police. It will gut border protections. So, and it's really interesting to note that these were investments that were made by Democrats and Republicans. So we need to fight to protect these investments that were made. That's why I wrote to the agencies. That's what they came back with. And I think it's overall, the cuts are devastating.
I want to just press one more point here on this. So there was a $1.4 trillion deficit last year. Overall federal debt is $31.4 trillion with a T. Are there any cuts you might support? What about a spending freeze?
I always love that question, and I'm just going to tell you why. First of all, the president's budget is talking about a $3 trillion cut in the deficit, et cetera. And this past time, it's $1.7 trillion that we've cut the deficit. It's always amazing to me that when this issue of the deficit comes up, no one ever stops to talk about the almost $2 trillion in a tax cut to the richest 1% of the people in this country, or the corporations who pay no tax at all. So let's talk about, the critical needs that people have and that we can meet. And at the same time, let's look at the tax breaks. And wouldn't it be a good idea to take a look there and what we are providing, rather than going to the critical needs of people in this country.
All right, last question, then we're going to talk about the topic of the day. How concerned are you that serious negotiations on the debt limit haven't started yet?
Well, I think this is a serious issue, and a very serious issue, because, and I also believe, and I have so stated, that we need to keep the negotiations on the debt limit separate from the negotiations on the government funding. Those two things cannot align. And everyone has heard this, but to put into jeopardy the full faith and credit of the United States, unheard of. But it would just seem to appear from some of the rhetoric that there's more of an appetite to move in that direction. And the worst thing that can happen, and this has been discussed, is let's move the negotiation on debt ceiling to September, in which case then you intertwine that with appropriations, which is a recipe for a government shutdown.
All right, that's some dismal forecasting here this morning. Let's talk about access to healthcare.
Yes.
We are in a post Roe versus Wade world right now, there's a lot of activity that's happening at the state level to restrict women's rights to abortion. What can and should Congress do?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, if I can just say this, the issue about women's health is very near and dear to my heart. I'm a survivor of ovarian cancer, some more than 35 years ago, and just by the grace of God and biomedical research, I'm sitting here this morning. And there was no epiphany, but when I thought about what I would do next, and I was chief of staff for Senator Dodd at the time, that I thought I should go out and try to do something. I didn't think I would run for Congress. I did several other things. But the issue of women's health has been very critically important to me. And having the opportunity to sit on appropriations, to sit on and to now be ranking member of Labor HHS, Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education, that oversees the NIH and the research in this area. It's very, very critically important to me. Okay. Now, the issue of terminating a pregnancy is a very deeply serious personal issue for women, and they don't take it lightly. When you think about, and that decision is made with a doctor, with family, with clergy, with whatever the closest people to the woman are in terms of helping to make that decision. So when you see that what the court did, it was less about the protection, in my view, of life, but rather it was about stripping the ability to control your own life and your own personal decisions. And that smacks to me of a lack of trust, a lack of respect for the choices that women make in their lives. And that, I think, is fundamental. It's fundamental to the entire abortion issue. It's fundamental to contraception and wanting to cut off contraception with Title X and other avenues. It is true of medication abortions, of trying to do that. Think about that. Think about, these are all examples of saying to women, you are a second-class citizen. You are not in charge of any decision in your life, because we know that these are health decisions, but they are also economic decisions. And so you just remove that ability from women to have the access to what is in their best of health and what is their economic and financial stability for themselves and for their families. That's pretty extraordinary.
Well, talk about that then. So let's just tease it out one step further, because you're in Congress. What should, when it comes to these issues, when it comes to abortion or contraception, is there a role to play? Is there going to be something that's going to be done?
Well, clearly, look, we have the Right to Contraception Act, which I'm, supportive of. Title X, we, in the omnibus bill, put $286, million in to deal with family planning. We have it's about enshrining into law the same thing that we did with fair pay with Lilly Ledbetter when the court, upturned Lilly's right, to be able to get the same pay that the man standing next to her was getting. We can enshrine these laws we can enshrine them into law, and that's the direction that we're going in. And we are looking at, when I think about, using the medication abortions, women are going to lose their lives. Mm-hmm. About half of the abortions in the country are medication abortions. 98%, require the access to the drug. And so what you're saying to women, in every aspect, this is what I want to go back, you have to put the pieces together, I think, and look at it in a way that talks about how we are restricting, constraining, demonizing women for the choices that they make in their lives. That is it's really incredible, and you think about it in those terms. Yes, Congress can do something about it, and I believe that there really is a very, very strong, healthy debate about moving forward in this area, and we've been doing it for a while. And through appropriations, we will continue to try to do that.
Let's talk about that. There's 4 women at
Yes.
the top of the Appropriations Committee. Historic. Historically, though, women's healthcare research has received very little funding. Will there ever be an equaling out of the playing field? Have you talked to your counterparts about
Well,
that?
I don't know quite what you mean about, you know, what the research is. I oversee the NIH, and, you know, I think we're up to about $47 billion to the NIH, and obviously we take a look at what that means to, you know, to women's health. We fund women's health at HHS. I was part of an effort. I mean, think about this. Many folks here don't know this, but it's really not that long ago. I'm in the Congress 32 years. When I first came, the big issue was women in clinical trials at the NIH. There were no women in clinical trials at the NIH. All the tests, or minorities for that matter, the tests were done on men, and the data extrapolated to women. Well, I mean, it's not rocket science. Women are physiologically different than men are. But we won that fight with both Democrats and Republicans, work closely with, you know, Connie Morella and Marge Ralkema, as well as, you know, Barbara Kennelly and, you know, Pat Schroeder. What a force Pat Schroeder was. I worked with her every single day, and she is such a great loss to us. But so we then now have women and minorities in clinical trials, and we pursue that effort with the NIH every time they come up. So we're focused on making sure that women are part of the research. And whether it was about COVID, we looked into the differences in terms of treatment for men and women, because there were some very big differences in how COVID manifested itself. And I mean, you know, we spent a lot of time thinking about how women are engaged and involved, and the research engages women in our research today.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking more about, you know, endometriosis, for example, or menopause, or some of these other areas that historically haven't received a ton of funding. Yeah. Is that something that you think there could be more of a focus on?
Look, absolutely, which is what we should do. And, you know, you think about that, but you think about, you know, breast cancer. You think about ovarian cancer. You think the dollars amount of research that are going into those areas. That's women's health. Women's health in a broad-based area, very, very consumed, you know, with that issue. And a lot of that, you know how that happens. You all here are students of the institution. Congress responds to external pressure. We know that. You watch what happened with the increase of funding for breast cancer over the years. Exponential, because of the coalition. Same with ovarian cancer, you know, and that's true. You know, where the juvenile diabetes, where the advocacy is strong and aggressive and so forth. So you call attention to, you know, to the issues, which make a difference.
I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about the FDA's March 9th announcement that health providers must notify women with dense breasts of their status. Tell us about the Find It Early Act, which you recently announced your intention to reintroduce.
Yes, very excited about this, and excited about the FDA announcement about providers having to mandated to give the information to women that they have dense breasts. Over half the women, or 40% of the women in the United States have dense breasts. I'm one of them. And essentially what that means is that the tissue is so dense and granular that the way it's been described, if you're looking, it's finding a tumor is like finding a snowball in a snow field. And that is because if you look at the photographs and you look at the coloring of the tissue. And so the regular mammogram doesn't really get at the finding of a tumor early on to deal with prevention, which is it. And we know that if you find it early, you prevent it. There's 98% survival. My God, 98% survival. So I worked on a long name, the Mammography Act, where we wanted to have this ruling by the FDA. They finally have made it. It's great. The providers now have to provide the information. But that means you have to go for further tests, an MRI, an ultrasound. Not everybody can afford it. So Find It Early says that insurers are mandated to cover the costs of an MRI or an ultrasound, and there is no cost sharing. So we've got the notification piece taken care of. Now we've got to get the insurance companies to move to guarantee the coverage at no cost.
So the notification process is there, but I have to say, like for myself, I've had a mammogram. I've never been told that. I don't know if someone said to me, "You have a dense breast," if I would know what that means. How much education needs to happen?
It really does. What I have found when I introduced the legislation and people found out about it, I would go into meetings, and this is at home, in the district, and hands would go up and say, "Yeah, I have dense breasts, etc." So that there is an education process. We've got to get that information out to people but there's also now the onus on the providers to let someone know, after you get the mammogram. I would get a notice saying you probably should go for an ultrasound because you have dense breasts, etc. Now, if I can pay for an ultrasound, then that's fine. And if I can't, well, I'm not going to do it. And therefore, I'm at risk. This is about saving lives and prevention of this effort. And that's what we want the insurance companies to do. We need to engage in education, and the providers can help us do that.
So much of this is about preventative care, right? And so we think of this coming out of COVID and people not wanting to go to their healthcare provider potentially because of the concerns or the risk factors during the pandemic, women's kind of lapsing of going and getting their pap smear and different things. How much do you think we need to expand tests like pap smears to increase the amount that they're being done, the kind of education that this preventative care is really, needed?
Yeah, well, look, I think there are, first of all, it's education. Second of all, it's the costs that are involved, and we saw, large uptick in illnesses, et cetera, during COVID. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so the whole issue of more testing, at what intervals, I want to take good advice from a medical profession on doing that. I know that in terms of mammograms, I want it to be as early as possible. I don't want to, I've had concerns about where the age levels are there, and I want to, make sure that we are being able to reach younger women and be able, and minority women, because that's a very, very big issue, and so at a lower age, et cetera. But I think there again, I can look at the research, I can listen to to the arguments, and then come to a conclusion. But I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical professional. So I don't want to speculate as to what are the best measures, but we need to have the best measures.
All right, we are quickly running out of time, but before I let you go, I have two off-topic questions.
Oh my God, it's always a problem.
You are a very close friend of Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi.
Yes.
What's the biggest change you've noticed in her since she stepped down from leadership?
Well, first of all, I am a dear friend, and so that you do know in this offline question, when I was thinking about, when my predecessor was thinking about running for governor of Connecticut, Nancy would call me, and she would just say, "Are you going to run? Are you going to run?" I said, "Well, Bruce, who I loved," I said, "he's still in the job. I can't not, do this." So, but she encouraged me to do this, and the day that he made the decision to do that, she says, "It's now. You've got to do it. You've got to run." So we do, in fact, go back a very, very long time. She is dear friends with my former employer, Chris Dodd. She and Senator Dodd's sister, Martha, went to school together, so I had a chance to meet Nancy very, very early on. I tell you in many respects, and she will self-describe this, there's a sense of liberation. And she's never been one to mince words, but and she brings that strength of spirit, of knowledge, of her commitment, and dedication to the issues, but in a way that gives her some freedom, which she may not have had as the speaker.
All right, last question. This one's from Jake Sherman. The Yukon Huskies are playing Arkansas tonight in the Sweet 16.
Go Yukon.
Any predictions?
Listen, go Yukon. That's it. It's Yukon above all.
All right, with that, we're going to close there. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Congressman.
so
We
much.
really appreciate
Great to be with you all. Thank you for coming out. Really. Thanks so much, my dear. Take care.
Appreciate it. All right, we are going to continue now with the fireside chat portion of the conversation. I'd like to welcome Yasmin Waran, Vice President of U.S. Medical Affairs and Women's Health Care at Bayer, and Beth Battolino, CEO of Healthy Women, to the stage. Ladies, welcome. All right, first things first, we learned backstage that you all have a lot in common that you didn't know about before coming here this morning, which I love. But I'm going to kind of tee it up to both of you. I think it's always helpful in these conversations to understand a little bit about your perspective, where you're coming from, what seat you have at the table when it comes to women's access to healthcare. So we'll start here.
Sure, thank you so much. So maybe I'll start by giving a little bit of background about myself, because I am feeling very much at home. I am back in my old stomping grounds. I was born and raised just across the bridge in Falls Church, Virginia, and did all my schooling here in the area, went to Marymount, and then went to Georgetown for med school and stayed there for residency. So this is very much home to me, and I'm so happy to be back, so thank you for the opportunity. I am an OBGYN by background, so the care of women and women's health care is very near and dear to my heart. I have the amazing privilege of now transitioning that work into Bayer, into working at Bayer. Bayer is very much a leader in women's healthcare, have been working in this space and innovating in this space for nearly 60 years. So a really neat piece of information I like to share is that Bayer launched the first birth control pill in 1966 here in the US, which led to a lot of the changes that we saw in terms of women in the workforce, et cetera. So pretty phenomenal to now have a seat at the table within the organization that sort of kicked that off and led that effort here in the US. In Bayer, I serve as Vice President of Medical Affairs for Women's Healthcare for the US team, and work with a phenomenal group of individuals that are medical in background in terms of their training, and that is what we bring to the table. We drive a lot of essentially the translation of the science into medicine, right? What does that mean in terms of patient care? Once the products have had the data generated around them, how do you then use that information to that science to create a better life for folks, right? How do you implement that and treat patients to improve whatever that they need help with? So that's the quick bit about me.
All right.
Hi, I'm Beth Battolino, and I also went to Marymount University. I'm from upstate New York originally, so go Orangemen. And I have the pleasure of heading up Healthy Women, which is the leading national not-for-profit women's health organization. I restarted it in 1997, and we are the largest digital platform that's providing women with important information about her health. Everything's medically vetted, so it's that trusted source. We call it inside, the trusted friend that you can rely on 24/7 to provide you with the information and resources that you need to make an educated decision about your health.
All right, well, we are going to start now. We covered a lot with the Congresswoman this morning, but I just want to start with the overall landscape as you see it right now. We are, as we kind of started, we're in a post-Roe world. Women's access to healthcare and contraceptives in some areas is a huge issue, in some areas under attack. Yasmin, I'd just love to start with you, kind of frame up the environment today as you see it, where we have women's access to healthcare in the U.S.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. And I might just take a step back and share with folks that the access and the challenges, particularly in this space of the care of women, right? I call it the care of women because I think when we talk about women's health care, that sometimes gets it doesn't, for me, it lands, the impact of saying the care of women, because that's essentially what it is, just lands a bit differently. The sort of challenges, right, and the disparities in this space have existed long before COVID and long before some of the legislative matters that we've seen come to fruition recently, right? I think what COVID did was COVID shined a light on those challenges and really allowed and put on display for many people that perhaps didn't have an insight into that, what that was like, right? And so what we're seeing now is that COVID just exacerbated those challenges, and there is the barriers that existed are only that much higher for women. And so that, I think, for myself, working within Bayer and Bayer Women's Healthcare, and I'm sure for Beth the same, only sort of reinvigorates that need to want to try to address those barriers being the access, right? So what does access mean? Because we talk about access all the time. What does that even mean? Right? Access can mean different things to different folks, but if you really look at it and dissect it, it is education. You mentioned that just now in your discussion with Representative DeLauro, right? Educating, particularly women and even all people, right, on what their options are, how their bodies work, right, and what the options will mean to their bodies if they choose to take those options. So education is a huge piece. Access in terms of ensuring that people have equal opportunity to all the options that are available to them as well. So it's about ensuring that folks have education about those options, and then ensuring that people have equal opportunity to gain those options, and equal opportunity to interface with clinicians that can provide good quality medical care for them, which, to your point, is one of the challenges.
Beth, I'd love to tease that out a little bit. COVID, the impact of it. You talked about your kind of organization as being the trusted friend, right? I think a lot of us were sitting in our houses concerned about so many different medical things. I had a lot of friends going through a lot of different issues, the impacts of COVID, much less, kind of pregnancy, all the way through. How did women or did your community utilize your service maybe more in the kind of through COVID and then in the post kind of now, the world that we're living in?
So we saw a surge during COVID. So the COVID positive is more people were paying attention and had access to technology, right? So we saw more people, as you said, using the computers, using their smartphones, gaining information, which was a good thing. We also saw telehealth being used more, right? And that's not going to go away. And that's a good thing because it provides access to healthcare professionals that some people may not have access. We're in DC right now, so you have access, but people living in Kansas or Oklahoma in rural areas may not have that same access. Well, telehealth is providing them that access. So we saw, I always say the COVID positive, no pun intended, but there was some positive things that came out of COVID. And as we started going back after COVID, and COVID's not done, but as we saw light at the end of the tunnel, people were going back to, get their preventative screenings, and they were seen on time. So people were like, I can make my appointment, I am being seen. And there's still much more work that needs to be done, but that's through education and to both consumers as well as the healthcare professionals that are managing.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. So when we think about this, we talked a little bit about this with Congresswoman DeLauro, right? The preventative care and how that fell off, right? For everyone, right?
Yep.
From myself included, right? You weren't trying to maybe go to appointments you didn't necessarily have to feel like you had to go to. What do you see as the consequences of not only kind of maybe our generation, but certainly a younger generation of women not seeking out that same level or frequency of medical care?
So I would say that it is so amazing that folks, the COVID positive that came out of that was that folks, I think, turned to technology to elevate their level of education and awareness around healthcare topics, right? Particularly women, and particularly because women who make up about 52% of the population and make about 90% of the decisions within a family nucleus, right? We're really sort of looking for ways to access that information. But unfortunately, what we've seen now happen is that just that, right? There is a decrease and a decline in preventative health care. OBGYN visits to the gynecologist are down, I think 39%, if I'm not mistaken, is the last number we saw. Breast cancer screening is down 10% and climbing. and pap smear screenings are down 25% and climbing. And so what is the downstream effect of that? The downstream effect of that is those screening measures that have been put into place to look for and make early diagnoses up front, similar to the discussion you had earlier. Now those aren't happening and those aren't taking place. And so then folks will enter the healthcare system later on, and perhaps with more advanced diagnoses or disease that will be more challenging to handle at the moment. So, really having those preventative healthcare discussions, going in to see the clinicians is super important because, the OBGYN visit or the visit to the nurse practitioner is really not just about a pap smear, right? It's about holistic care and assessing the whole of the person in front of you, the whole of the woman in front of you, and going through a lot of that information that will keep her healthy.
And I'm just going to jump in because we just did a recent study of over 6,000 women, and it's part of our national action plan, and we found out it's women in the middle. So we're so busy taking care of everyone else that we're not prioritizing our health. So we're putting off the mammograms, we're putting off our pap test, and we're putting everyone, even the dog, ahead of us. So we're trying to shift that back to the importance of taking care of you. And we do have an Affordable Care Act that covers 26 preventative screenings. So it's really important that women start taking care of themselves.
How much is that? We've talked about education, right? The congressman said, "Hey, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist," but you talk about that in terms of the number of tests now that are a part of the Affordable Care Act. You talk about kind of just people understanding. I think of next generation understanding what's even applicable to them in terms of contraception. Where does that start? How can we make sure that education gap is getting closed?
Well, Healthy Women this is part of our vertical, and we're doing all we can to educate women where she's at. So we have multi-channel platform that's making sure that she is receiving the information in the way that she wants to receive, and we're also working with allied healthcare professionals to make sure that they have the information and the tools they need to educate their patient population. Yeah.
And I would just add that, we talked about access and what that means. So education and awareness is a huge piece of access, but then ensuring that there's equal opportunity, right, to gain those options is another element that I think we need to also focus on. So partnering with, for example, at Bayer, we partner with Direct Relief, which is a non-for-profit that works to ensure that underserved communities with uninsured populations have that equal opportunity, right?
Yeah, that's health equity, right? So if we talk about that, and maybe Beth, you can kind of add to that, which is, there's huge barriers when it comes to low-income women, when it comes to certain minorities and different rural versus, urban. What can we understand more about the challenges there, and how can we close that gap?
Well, I think it's working with the groups that are reaching those populations, right? So we also know that one size never fit all. Right, so making sure that we identify the groups that are doing such a great job and partnering with them instead of reinventing the wheel. And that's another thing that I think Healthy Women does a great job with, and reaching those communities with the information in the way that they want to receive it as well. Because something that we may take as education, we need to tweak it to get to, to reach other markets in a way that they would like to receive it and in the language that they want to receive it. Yeah.
All right, we're going to have just a couple more quick questions, and we're quickly coming to a close here. But I do want to ask, we talked a little bit about funding because obviously Congressman DeLauro is the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee. Research funding for women's health, certainly when it comes to endometriosis, when it comes to menopause, some of the other issues have historically not gotten as much funding as maybe some other areas. What needs to change there? Are you starting to see some recognition that, she was talking about how even 30 years ago, women weren't even part of medical trials. We've obviously seen some progress.
Yeah, that's progress for sure. I would say we've made progress, but there's still far to go. Certainly, if you look at the amount of funding that goes towards looking at areas of unmet need within the care of women or women's health care, it's far less than the funding that goes to other medical areas, particularly when you look at maternal health and morbidity. If the March of Dimes just put out a new statistic for those that may have not seen it, but maternal mortality and morbidity here in the United States has gone up 89% since 2018. which is quite drastic and quite stark to think about, and that's here in the U.S. And so, when you think about research and innovation in that space and making sure that we are appropriately creating awareness around it and then doing something about it, right? Funding that research along with the other areas that have been mentioned. PCOS is another one, right? These are areas that we have to, again, create awareness around and create that push, as Congresswoman just mentioned, to create change and create movement.
No, well said. I would say the same thing. We just need to invest more. I'm glass half full, so I do like to see, it's all about the great things and changes we've seen, but there still needs to be more investment in women's health.
All right, we're going to close here with the question that we often do at Punchbowl News events. You have the stage here. We're in Washington. There's staff here. There's members that are paying attention, advocates on these issues. What's one thing that you wish people here would understand or need to know more about when it comes to the issue of access to health care?
We still need a lot. There still needs a lot to be done. Women don't have access to the care that they need, and we're seeing that right now with contraception, especially. So I would encourage women to stay focused on some of the policy issues right now, because together we can make a change.
And I will pick up right there and say, understand that we're all part of an ecosystem. We are not working in silos, right? And that's not what's going to get us to the next level in terms of care for women, care for our families, care for our societies, because it's my deep-seated belief that when you care for women and when women are feel supported and have the agency to do that, you are in fact caring for families, you are in fact caring for communities, and you are in fact caring for the world at the end of the day. So understand that we are part of an ecosystem, and that when we realize that and start working together, whether it's on the industry side, on the nonprofit side, on the policy side, on the agency side, right, the FDA side, we're all in an ecosystem, and we all got to sort of understand that, work together, and push things forward.
All right, we are going to close there. Yasmin, Beth, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody here for joining us in person and on the live stream, and of course to Bear for making this conversation possible, as well as Congresswoman DeLauro for her time this morning. We have a lot more events coming up in the coming weeks and days. You can go to Punchbowl News and check out our events hub. With that, have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you.